Hello, everyone. We are live here at the People's Basics. It is Friday, April 9th. Welcome to today's show. We're going to be giving a recap on some of the news items from the week. As you have seen in the description, we'll be covering a mass shooting and gun control measures that have followed it. We will be covering the Derek Chauvin trial that is ongoing for the killing of George Floyd and whether or not that will be classified as a murder. We have the opinion that it clearly is. And we'll be covering the global trends report of some of the biggest issues that are going to be facing our planet, at least for the next 4 years, but likely for the foreseeable future. And then finally, we're going to be talking about the ongoing migration crisis at the border currently and talking about what are really the distinctions there. We'll be going through some articles and just, reading through and giving some of our commentary of what's been going on. We'll also be taking any of your questions or comments along the way to try and respond to them. So if you are watching live, we want to encourage you all to come in and comment what you're thinking about these news stories so that we can have a conversation. Furthermore, finally, before we get into today's subjects, I want to give a couple plugs of some ongoing announcements we have for the General People's Basics Network. We will be, in general, looking to have this format be our regular Friday format, where we're going to give you our weekly updates. We're going to be having on Thursdays a little bit more satirical, humorous content. We'll be introducing a new character for myself to play as a satirized character, similar to what like Stephen Colbert did at the Colbert Report. We're going to be doing Mr. Podcast Populist here, and that'll be a Thursday affair. We'll be looking to create some more humorous content. And then furthermore, we'll continue to try and fill our Mondays through Wednesdays with the Commoner's Corner. But if we don't have anything there, we'll try and fill in the time with some other thoughts that we could fill in the time with. So that's the programming. Likewise, we're also going to be having the team update be now only a monthly affair instead of a weekly affair. So that'll be happening the first Thursday of every month instead of weekly on Thursday. And we will also be moving our community night from a weekly affair to a monthly affair as well. It'll be moving from Thursdays to the first of the month. So that'll be what we're looking to do going forward. And finally, we are looking to continue to hire people. We're looking to write more articles on our team, develop our comic series, and create more videos. So if you're looking to join us, please click the description section to be able to look to join our team. That being said, friends, let's get into today's stories. So the first one that we're going to be covering, let's share the screen here. The first one we're going to be covering is a tragedy. There was people killed in a mass shooting in Bryan, Texas, leaving one dead, as well as a trooper and 5 others wounded in this incident. So the story goes, a man armed with a pistol on Thursday killed 1 person and wounded 5 others at a cabinet production plant, sending workers scrambling for safety in what became the latest in a spate of mass shootings across the United States in recent weeks. The suspected shooter was identified late Thursday as 27-year-old Larry Bolin of Grimes County. Bolin, who was charged with murder, also allegedly shot a pursuing Texas Department of Public Safety trooper while fleeing the scene. The trooper remained in serious but stable condition as of Thursday night. Bolin was arrested around 4:30 p.m. near Bedias, about 35 miles east of the original scene. The victims have not been identified. This is at least the 4th mass shooting in the United States since March 16th, when a gunman killed 8 people, including 6 women of Asian descent. As you all saw, we had done one of our previous episodes covering that mass shooting as well. That had taken place at 3 spas or massage parlors in Atlanta, Georgia. The following week, on March 22nd, a shooter killed 10 shoppers at a grocery store in Boulder, Colorado. And Wednesday, a former NFL player died by suicide after killing 5 people, including a prominent doctor in South Carolina. The grim pattern continued around 2:30 p.m. at 350 Stone City Drive in Bryan, a city of about 85,000, located 100 miles northwest of downtown Houston and a short drive from Texas A&M University. Witnesses described a harrowing scene when the shooter entered a manufacturing plant for Bryan-based Kentmore Cabinets, identified as the shooter's employer. One Kentmore employee said the suspect appeared to be targeting specific people. I feel like he came with the intention of harming somebody from the very jump, said Mark Barron, adding that the shooter was armed with a pistol. He was just looking for the right person and the right time. Bryan Police Chief Eric Busk said in addition to the fatality, 4 people were taken to St. Joseph's Hospital in critical condition with gunshot wounds. 1 person was transported with a minor injury to a College Station hospital, and another was hospitalized after a possible asthma attack, police said. Busk said police do not believe there are other suspects. So there's more, and we'll cover more in this, but the reason why we wanted to bring up this story, first of all, with you all, is that, frankly, the main reason I wanted to talk about this is 2 things. 1, a lot of the talk of ongoing gun control measures is regarding 2 issues. It's mainly predominantly focused on the hate crime aspect, which is a serious thing, and we covered in the coverage of the Asian hate crime story of the spots. The second was that this is mainly focused on assault rifles. The AR-15 is the predominant weapon that people are looking to have under control, and we will see in some of the orders that that is still part of that focus. But there is a lot more that needs to be done, and frankly, as we saw reported in here, the assailant was using a pistol, and this was not necessarily anything related to race, but just simple animosity toward other individuals. And for me, this raises the concern of why we don't have, in general, more concern over general, restrictions of firearms in general, to make sure that it is harder to be able to acquire one, and that you are regularly showing that it is being stored in a safe manner, and that, frankly, that you are having to go through regular screenings for mental health on a periodic basis. Now, obviously, I'm never going to say that any measure is going to stop 100% of gun crimes. That will not happen. People will illegally be able to acquire firearms. People will have moments of rage and social isolation that leads them to unquestionable acts of derangement, in my opinion. But we need to be trying to actually take measures. And so let's go back into the story and see a little bit more of the details behind some of the causes, because I think we're seeing a lot of this stress from continued just, not just economic anxiety, but just general, frankly, tears from polarization and just general unrest in the nation. So let's go back into our article here. So we go in. The Bryan Police Department and the Texas Department of Public Safety said the investigation is ongoing and have not released a positive motive. Yeah, so there's a lot that we could just speculate all day, but there's clearly cause for someone to be able to do much more harm because this was a concealable weapon, and they came into their basic body of employment and decided to open fire on specific people and people who were frankly just trying to flee the scene once they became feeling like they were at threat to be taken down. So there are a lot of layers that we're trying to unfold to make sure we get the answers we need, said Texas DPS Lieutenant Craig Cummings. That's all a part of this ongoing investigation and the reason why we have multiple Texas Rangers there on the scene, working on this along with our Criminal Investigations Division. In a statement, Governor Greg Abbott said he is working with state law enforcement and will assist in any way needed to help prosecute the suspect. Cecilia and I are praying for the victims and their families and for the law enforcement officer injured while apprehending the suspect, he said. It's unclear whether the suspect was a former or current employee of Kentmore. The company issued a statement about the shooting, but did not respond to a follow-up question about the shooter's employment status. Quote, "We are devastated by the events today at our Bryan manufacturing facility located on Stone City Drive," the company said. "Our hearts go to the families and the loved ones of those affected. We want to thank the many members of our law enforcement teams and others, emergency personnel who responded so quickly. We are fully cooperating with law enforcement during the investigation of this horrible crime." The company added that its focus is on providing support to and prayers for our employees and the extended Kentmore Cabinet's family during this tragic time. Founded in 1971 by Texas A&M University student Kent Moore, the company now employs nearly 600 people across Texas. It also has showrooms and sales offices in cities including Austin, Houston, and Fort Worth, according to its website. 2 employees told reporters that they initially thought the loud banging noise was a falling cabinet. Alice Taylor, an employee of 26 years, said she did not think much of the sound until people around her said someone was firing a gun. She rushed for cover and eventually fled the facility. "Nothing like this has ever happened before," she said. "It's terrible." Barron, an employee of 2 years, had a closer brush with the gunman. He said he worked near the man on a regular basis. At one point during the shooting, Barron said he locked eyes with the man. whom he did not identify by name. The man turned away and shot another person, he said. I never had a problem, at least with him. So I don't know if that had anything to do with it, he said, adding, nobody expects for stuff like this to happen because you see them every day. So this kind of reflects that this person is more of an employee compared to the previous part of the article that said the company could not confirm it. So let's keep going. Despite the fear among employees, they were quick to assist police with information, said Chief Busk. I certainly understand why they feel shaken, Busk said, but I appreciate all of the cooperation that we received from the employees. The entire incident spanned 3 different locations. After fleeing the Bryan plant, the shooter traveled about 25 miles east to Iola. There, in the 20,100 block of FM 39, he shot the deputy. He continued further east until arriving in Bedias, where he was arrested. Police remained at the Iola shooting scene through Thursday night. Officers had established a perimeter around a home at the address, asking over a loudspeaker for a resident to come to the door. Let yourself be known, officers could be heard saying over the loudspeaker. We are not here to hurt you. It's unclear whether the lingering police presence was related to the shooting. Hours before the tragedy, President Joe Biden unveiled a series of executive actions aimed at curbing gun violence nationwide. The measures includes a crackdown on ghost guns, homemade firearms that lack serial numbers used to trace them, and are often purchased without a background check. He is also pushing to tighten restrictions on pistol stabilizing braces like the one used in the Boulder shooting. Gun violence in this country is an epidemic, and it is an international embarrassment, Biden said from the White House Rose Garden. Yeah, so as I said before, I think it's really clear that we have to be laying out that this is more than just a assault rifle problem, that this is a general gun violence epidemic, and that he is right that we should be targeting the specific illegal gun supply. I can agree with many people that people have the right to own a firearm. But when we look at the actual problems of what firearms are being used to kill people, it's pistols right now. They commit 20 times more murder with pistols compared to rifles. And it's not just an ownership disparity that people just own pistols more often. It's pretty close in ownership rate. 72% of people who are gun owners own a pistol, while 62% of gun owners own a rifle. So it's not as big as this ratio that I just explained to you, which is 20 to 1. And it should make sense to a lot of you out there why this could be. It's because it's a concealable, very mobile weapon that people can be able to bring in and not, cause a fuss. They can be a lot more stealthy about its usage. And frankly, this is not even considering beyond homicides, the violence in general that it can cause, being a lot easier for incidents of accidents in the home, especially for children, because it's easier to be able to pull the trigger for pistols compared to these rifles. And furthermore, it is a predominant cause of suicide, or not cause, but method of suicide, predominantly used by men. So there is a lot to be said about the need to, regulate pistols. And so let's go into our next story here, which is about the, executive orders that the Biden administration made. So he announced a couple of reforms. So let's go here. So he says 4 major items here. You heard about the rules on unregistered guns called ghost guns. The Justice Department has to come up with regulations on these and guns that just come from assembled parts in the next month. So we will be looking to continue to report on what will come out of the Justice Department in the next month, because we can agree it doesn't do us a lot of good if it's just easy to access the individual parts to assemble. We have the problems related to 3D printing of firearms, but that doesn't mean, obviously, we don't do controls with the existing supply that's legal, so that we don't have, excessive gear to make it easier for people to do damage, and frankly, that we make it harder for someone to get it. Like, we have a licensing program where people have to prove that they have been properly trained and can operate it. Now, mind you, this can vary a lot by locality, but the idea is we want to standardize this at a national level so that we don't have these disparities basically saying I can go easily get a gun in the town over because I'm at like a borderline between states. We need to have this be a national solution as a country. So that's the first one. Rules on unregistered ghost guns. The next is tighter controls on pistols. The department must make sure pistols that are fitted with stabilizing braces, essentially turning them into rifles, are regulated under the National Firearms Act. The suspect in the recent shooting in Boulder used an adapted pistol, which are easier to get hold of than rifles. Personally, I feel like there should be some more standardization here, but I understand what they're trying to say in that there are certain pieces of equipment that are simply augmenting these weapons to be able to do higher damage, and we have to wonder, shouldn't there be a higher level of restriction to those things where it's not just for at the point of self-defense, but potentially going on assault? I think so, but we will continue to check on that. The next is more resources for prevention measures. Joe Biden will be telling agencies to pump more resources into community violence prevention measures, and the Justice Department to suggest red flag laws that give family members steps to take firearms away from those that they deem a threat. So again, and I think we had covered this in a recent story about how the Biden administration is making the recommendation for the Supreme Court to be able to also rule that officers who have been called to confiscate a weapon who do not have a warrant yet should still be able to do that. And we actually had a conversation with Trisha Garrett about this on a recent Commoner's Corner episode as well. And, you know, I personally think that this should be something that is allowed, where people who are potential threats, imminent threats by those that are their loved ones in close proximity who threatened, they should be able to confiscate weaponry from them. It should be temporary. It should be returned if everything is found to be good. But I think we owe that right to people who are feeling like their lives are in danger to have people who potentially are those threats not have the capacity to do even more damage. Obviously, this should be temporary, and people should be able to seek justice when it's found to be wrong for the inconvenience done to them. But that should be something that should be allowed, and it should not be a criminal offense for an officer to decide to do that confiscation. And so I think these measures to provide more funding and intervene holds some real value. Let's go back in. Next, finally, it would do political support. Officials said that they would also be encouraging congressional Democrats to pass more regulations on gun control. That doesn't do a ton, frankly. We'll see what actually comes out of it. This is just kind of a call to action. So that is our story on the ongoing crisis that had happened in America of rising gun violence rates. So I am highly encouraging that we start to actually treat safety of Americans as a basic fundamental thing that everyone deserves. It's not just threats from abroad, and we're going to talk about it's not threats of the other. We have to grapple with it's our own internal dynamics that are not keeping us safe right now. And you know, it's not just the side of other Americans who are not part of government. It's also government too, which leads us into our next story, which is related to the Derek Chauvin trial. He basically was said to have been using excessive force and to the point of murdering George Floyd. He is currently standing on trial. The expert police witness basically said that Derek Chauvin used a technique designed to inflict pain for an extended period of time on George Floyd as he testified at the former officer's murder trial yesterday. Sergeant Jody Steiger, a Los Angeles police specialist on the use of force, said video footage showed Chauvin using pain compliance by pulling Floyd's wrists into handcuffs and clicking them tighter. The technique is used to inflict pain to encourage compliance. But with Floyd not resisting and lying on the ground, Steiger said the only point was to cause him pain. Earlier, Steiger questioned the use of any force given the low level of offense Floyd was accused of, using a counterfeit $20 bill in a store. A small group of protesters have shown up each day outside the courthouse to demand justice for Floyd during the trial, and they have met to determine the group of 7 here. So you can find out more if you want to read this. This is an article by The Guardian. Next, they said, meanwhile, Tashara Jones was elected okay, so that's not on the same story. So let's go into the actual article that we wanted to cover on this. That was just a nice, useful transition by The Guardian between stories. So the next one was why this case might actually go differently than a lot of the others. And that is because, frankly, that we've been starting to get some of the people who have come on trial are, frankly, other law officers. And this is a very rare thing to happen in some of these cases. And there are some important distinctions for why this might be occurring. So they say in the article, during his lengthy testimony Monday, Minneapolis police chief minced no words in condemning the actions of Derek Chauvin, the former officer who is charged with murder in the death of George Floyd. To continue to apply that level of force to a person proned out, handcuffed behind their back, that in no way, shape, or form is anything that is by policy. He said that was Chief Medaria Arando said. It is not part of our training and is certainly not part of our ethics or values. Arradondo's testimony should have come at no surprise. In his opening statement, prosecutor Jerry Blackwell told jurors that Arradondo wouldn't hold back in his assessment that Chauvin used excessive force when he knelt on Floyd's neck for 9 minutes, 29 seconds last May. Still, Arradondo's testimony was rare. That he was joined by a string of other law enforcement officers was remarkable. Among those joining Arradondo on the stand as prosecution witnesses were Lieutenant Richard Zimmerman, the longest-serving officer in the Minneapolis Police Department, and Inspector Katie Blackwell, who at the time of Floyd's death was the commander of the training division. Sergeant David Ploger, Chauvin's former supervisor, also admonished his actions. Ploger testified last week that, among other things, when Floyd was no longer offering up any resistance to the officers, they could have ended their restraint, and that Chauvin didn't initially divulge that he had knelt on Floyd's neck. Arradondo, Zimmerman, Ploger, and Blackwell didn't protect Chauvin behind the so-called blue wall of silence for various reasons, legal and law enforcement experts say. The blue wall of silence describes an unofficial oath among police officers not to report a colleague's wrongdoings, including crimes. Paul Butler, a law professor at Georgetown University Law Center and former federal prosecutor, said the blue wall means that sometimes police officers close rank and right or wrong they're blue. Many times when police officers are charged with killing someone, it is because they shot the person, said Butler, an MSNBC legal analyst who is also a contributing columnist for the Washington Post. Quote, the act of shooting someone requires a split-second decision, he said. In those instances, police officers might be reluctant to testify against their colleague, in part because they resent being second-guessed by people who don't know the dangers of their profession, Butler said in an interview Wednesday. Chauvin's restraint to Floyd, however, was measured, Butler said. He had 9 minutes and 29 seconds to consider his actions, quote, he said. The international protests against racism and police brutality spurred by Floyd's death also may be a reason for the blue wall of silence has crumbled, Butler said. I think the officers who are testifying want to model what good cops look like, both for the jury and the public. In contrast to Chauvin, he said, I've been impressed by how many officers are willing to go on the record about how Chauvin violated both police procedures and criminal law. Zimmerman made a series of damning statements Friday about Chauvin's actions. Quote, pulling him down to the ground, face down, and putting your knee on a neck for that amount of time, it's just uncalled for, said Zimmerman, who joined the department in 1985 and leads its homicide unit. Zimmerman responded to the scene after Floyd was taken away in an ambulance. He testified that what Chauvin had done was totally unnecessary. He said that he saw no reason for why the officers felt they were in danger. If that's what they felt, and that's what they would have to feel to be able to use that kind of force. His testimony was compelling, Butler said, because police witnesses are often reluctant to draw conclusions like that because either they don't want to be part of getting an officer convicted or they want the jury to determine whether the force was excessive. This hasn't been the case for some of Chauvin's former colleagues. One of the reasons why, frankly, we are covering this story is obviously this is an ongoing story of the Chauvin trial, but more importantly, it is calling out this dynamic. It is calling into attention why protest matters. It's calling that when we actually publicize these things, it tells officers there is a need to actually emulate and display what good law enforcement can look like and hold themselves accountable. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm still going to hold my breath depending on how this trial ends up. There is still a cynical part about myself who says that too many officers have gotten off, and so maybe even if Chauvin is convicted, his sentencing will be less than the justice that is demanded. And so we will wait and see. But I think this is noteworthy. I think this is what we need to be able to get more of these prosecutions, is getting more law enforcement to come out and say this is wrong. And the way we do that is to continue to be able to put public pressure on people. But not just that, it is calling attention to when good cops do the right thing and hold their own officers accountable. We need to recognize that. The carrot and the stick have to be acknowledged. People fear that their career will be completely destroyed if they come out and speak. And so what do we have to do as a public? We have to assert that these people are doing right and acknowledge that. And so that's why I wanted to bring attention to this, is yes, there's the ongoing trial, and we hope there is justice, because from our vantage point of watching the video evidence and those who had testified being at the scene as witnesses, we believe it is, in our opinion, that it is murder, and that there is cause for it to potentially be even premeditated from their past relationships, knowing each other, George Floyd and Derek Chauvin. So I think there is a lot to be considered here, and I hope justice will be delivered. But I wanted to bring attention to these officers who were willing to testify. Let me go back into the story. Arredondo, the city's first black police chief, also testified in the trial of Mohamed Noor, a former police officer who was accused of murder in the fatal shooting of Justine Rougec-Demond, who had called the police to report hearing what she thought was a sexual assault of a woman in an alley behind her home. Noor was convicted of third-degree murder. DeLacy Davis, who retired as a sergeant with the East Orange Police Department in New Jersey in 2006, said it is rare for a police chief to testify against an officer in a criminal case. Davis, a use of force and community policing expert, said he believes there are 3 reasons Arredondo testified against Chauvin. The first being that Chauvin's actions were egregious. Davis said that that was evidenced by how quickly Arredondo fired the 4 officers involved in Floyd's arrest. They were fired May 26th, the day after Floyd died. Typically, Davis said, police chiefs will wait weeks or months to discipline officers for misconduct, if they do at all, and in most cases, only after facing public pressure. The second reason he believes Arredondo testified was to bolster morale, to also support the men and women who are still working in Minneapolis but have to somehow pick up their morale and recenter their practice as professional law enforcement officers. He needed to send a very clear message, Davis said, and I think he did that. Davis said Arredondo did not condemn all of policing. He condemned the actions of the 4 involved officers. Davis quoted Arredondo's statement in June, saying Floyd's death was a murder that one of the responding officers had caused and the 3 others failed to prevent. Davis, who is black, said he believes race also influenced Arredondo's decision to testify. Being a police chief of color, he has clearly demonstrated either the unwillingness or the inability to detach his melanin from the reality of what black and brown people experience at the hands of law enforcement in this country, Davis said, because my experience has been, even with black officers, they'll toe the company line. Davis said he believes the Minneapolis police officers condemned Chauvin's actions because his actions were indefensible. They could not defend it without shaming their entire agency, he said. Floyd, who is black, had been accused of using a fake $20 bill to buy cigarettes at a convenience store. He was recorded on widely seen bystander video handcuffed, face down on the pavement, telling the officers he couldn't breathe. Katie Blackwell, the inspector who took the stand Monday, said that she has known Chauvin for about 20 years and that he had received annual training in defense tactics and use of force. She said he would have been trained to use 1 or 2 arms, not his knee in a neck restraint. After the prosecution showed her a photo of Chauvin with his knee on Floyd's neck, she said, I don't know what kind of improvised position that is. Chauvin's attorney, Eric Nelson, has argued that Floyd's use of illegal drugs and his underlying health conditions caused his death, not Chauvin's kneeling on him, as prosecutors have said. The county medical examiner's office classified Floyd's death as a homicide, a death caused by someone else. The report said Floyd died of cardiopulmonary arrest, complicating law enforcement subdual, restraint, and neck compression. Under, quote, other significant conditions, it said Floyd suffered from hypertensive heart disease and listed fentanyl intoxication and recent methamphetamine use. Those factors weren't listed under cause of death. Davis said he believes Floyd's death was the result of a split-second decision. Quote, I believe Derek Chauvin made a split-second decision that George Floyd was not worthy of any of the basic humanity that he was pleading for. He said, I hope this is a tipping point in law enforcement that we are now seeing officers of many races speaking up and speaking out. I think that was important. I wanted to give that call out that there are officers who are now taking that effort to be able to call out these wrongdoings. And I do want to make a final note that I do think of how tragic it is that this encounter even occurred due to the use of a fake $20 bill. And so in my mind, I wonder how often do crimes potentially get stopped because simply people are now taken out of poverty and they don't need to use the fake 20 because they have a real 20. I think about that a lot, and all I have to say is I am really hoping that the family and community that loved George Floyd is recovering, and then I hope that we can get justice in this case and see action at the federal level, doing things like the Justice in Policing Act, or the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. We covered that in another one of our team streams, and it doesn't go as far as we obviously would like it to, and you can hear why we thought that in that episode, but we need action to finally occur, and I just want to express my solidarity to all who are feeling pain from this incident. We need to have this not keep happening. So again, solidarity to all those out there. But let's keep going on. Let's go to our next story, a little bit different. We're talking now about a release of a report that comes out basically every 4 years. And this comes out from basically the intelligence community, it comes out every 5 years. And it's giving you basically a look out into the future of what are the current trends. And so I wanted to just go through with everyone here the executive summary of what are some of those trends. And some of them are going to sound kind of familiar because it's what we talk about very often are the main challenges in society currently. So let's give it a read through. So this edition of Global Trends constructs its analysis of the future in several stages. First, we examine structural forces in demographics, environment, economics, and technology that shape the contours of our future world. Second, we analyze how these structural forces and other factors combined with human responses affect emerging dynamics in societies, states, and the international system. Third, we envision 5 plausible scenarios for the distant future in 2040. The key themes discussed above appear across these sections. So next, structural forces setting the parameters. Trends in demographics and human development, environment, economics, and technology are laying the foundation and constructing the balance of our future world. In some areas, these trends are becoming more intense, such as changes in our climate, the concentration of people in urban areas, and the emergence of new technologies. Trends in other areas are more uncertain. Gains in human development and economic growth are likely to slow and may even reverse in some areas, although a mix of factors could change this trajectory. The convergence of these trends will offer opportunities for innovation, but also will leave some communities and states struggling to cope and adapt. Even apparent progress, such as new and advanced technologies, will be disruptive to many people's lives and livelihoods, leaving them feeling insecure and basically, forcing adaptation. So, the most certain trends during the next 20 years will be a major demographic shifts as global population growth slow and the world rapidly ages. Some developed and emerging economies, including in Europe and East Asia, will grow old faster and face contracting populations, weighing on economic growth. In contrast, some developing countries in Latin America, South Asia, and the Middle East, and North Africa benefit from the larger working age populations, offering opportunities for a demographic dividend if coupled with improvements in infrastructure and skills. Human development, including health, education, and household prosperity, has made historic improvements in every region during the past few decades. Many countries will struggle to build on and even sustain these successes. Past improvements focused on the basics of health, education, and poverty reduction. But the next levels of development are more difficult and face headwinds from the COVID-19 pandemic, potentially slower global economic growth, aging populations, and the effects of conflict and climate. These factors will challenge governments seeking to provide the education and infrastructure needed to improve the productivity of their growing urban middle classes in the 21st century economy. As some countries rise to these challenges and others fall short, shifting global demographic trends almost certainly will aggravate disparities in economic opportunity within and between countries during the next 2 decades, as well as create more pressure for and disputes over migration. In the environment, the physical effects of climate change are likely to intensify during the next 2 decades, especially in the 2030s. More extreme storms, droughts, and floods, melting glaciers and ice caps, and rising sea levels will accompany rising temperatures. The impact will disproportionately fall on the developing world and poorer regions and intersect with environmental degradation to create new vulnerabilities and exacerbate existing risks to economic prosperity, food, water, health, and energy security. Governments, societies, and the private sector are likely to expand adaptation and resilience measures to manage existing threats, but these measures are unlikely to be evenly distributed, leaving some populations behind. Debates will grow over how and how quickly to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions. During the next 2 decades, several global economic trends, including rising national debt, a more complex and fragmented trading environment, a shift in trade, and new employment disruptions, are likely to shape conditions within and between states. Many governments may find they have reduced flexibility as they navigate greater debt burdens, diverse trading rules, and a broader array of powerful state and corporate actors exerting influence. Large platform corporations, which provide online markets for large numbers of buyers and sellers, could drive continued trade globalization and help smaller firms grow and gain access to international markets. These powerful firms are likely to try to exert influence in political and social arenas, efforts that may lead governments to impose new restrictions. Asian economies poised to continue decades of growth through at least 2030, although potentially slower. They are unlikely to reach the per capita gross domestic product or economic influence of existing advanced economies, including the United States and Europe. Productivity growth remains a key variable. An increase in the rate of growth could alleviate many economic, human development, and other challenges. So, I find this to be very interesting to hear this kind of trends pattern, because it really goes to the fact that we are knowing that there is a trend towards humans continuing to be more and more out of work, and having more and more people need to be supported who are going to be out of work, and how it's going to be a system of a winner-takes-all economy where you're going to have this concentration in firms, and because of that, they're going to have more power, and some of that power is to be able to influence private society that has their own small businesses to have to work through themselves, and frankly, governments too. So a lot of this is confirming what we have already said are some of the big things. But I will note one thing that this trends report makes me think about, and I need to grapple with more. We had recently talked about this in our controversial policies video, and even we've done this many times. I am still open and would love to talk to more people, frankly, on the subject of open borders, because I think I am someone right now who is not pro open borders. But I am seeing with some of these emerging trends and the exacerbation of the migration crisis that it might be more common sense to allow kind of this free movement of people, um, instead of having this kind of restriction on a nation by nation level. Um, Something to keep in mind. I think that's something we should have more conversation about. And so, if you have strong opinions on that matter, let's talk about it. I want to flesh my feelings about that out. I don't have a ton of strong feelings on that, but yeah, let's talk about it. Sign up for our Commoners Corner. Let's have at it. Well, let's go back into the trends report now. So they were talking about next technology. Technology will offer the potential to mitigate problems such as climate change and disease, and to create new challenges such as job displacement. Technologies are being invented, used, spread, and then discarded at ever increasing speeds around the world, and new centers of innovation are emerging. During the next 2 decades, the pace and reach of technological developments are likely to increase ever faster, transforming a range of human experiences and capabilities while also creating new tensions and disruptions within and between societies, industries, and states. State and non-state rivals will vie for leadership and dominance in science and technology, with potentially cascading risks and implications for economic, military, and societal security. Now they go into emerging dynamics. These structural forces, along with other factors, will intersect and interact at the levels of societies, states, and the international system, creating opportunities as well as challenges for communities, institutions, corporations, and governments. These interactions are also likely to produce greater contestation at all levels that has been seen since the end of the Cold War, reflecting different ideologies as well as contrasting views on the most effective way to organize society and tackle emerging challenges. Within societies, there is increasing fragmentation and contestation over economic, cultural, and political issues. Decades of steady gains in prosperity and other aspects of human development have improved lives in every region and raised people's expectations for a better future. As these trends plateau and combine with rapid social and technological changes, large segments of the global population are becoming wary of institutions and governments that see as unwilling or unable to address their needs. People are gravitating to familiar and like-minded groups for community and security, including ethnic, religious, and cultural identities, as well as groupings around interests and causes, such as environmentalism. The combination of newly prominent and diverse identity allegiances and a more siloed information environment is exposing and aggravating fault lines within states, undermining civic nationalism, and increasing volatility. I think this is a really important thing for them to be calling out here. It's basically saying how, because of the level of uncertainty that is being created by the increasing pace of development, from technological change and climate change, frankly, that we are having people in the pursuit of security look to go toward their identity groups as a place of like sanctuary, a safe place for them to hang out. And so this is creating a more siloed system, which is creating a impact on a distortion of truth, essentially, that you are now believing only one version of the truth and we don't have a shared truth anymore. So I think this is, part of the technological problems is, well, social media. We talk about this being a silo effect, but we also have to talk about just displacement. When the economy is moving faster, that means people can be displaced faster. And yes, hopefully it means that they can get replaced faster too. They can get a new job, but that's not the case always, because this new technological trend has been replacing more cognitive labor in the automation compared to past automation trends, which have primarily been manual labor. So this is a different trend, and we have to start addressing that. And so the things we advocate here, like the universal basics and universal basic income, we think can keep people afloat and feel more secure so that they don't have to feel so tribal as they do currently. Okay, next. At the state level, we are going to say the relationships between the societies and their governments in every region are likely to face persistent strains and tensions because of a growing mismatch between what publics need and expect and what governments can and will deliver. Populations in every region are increasingly equipped with the tools, capacity, and incentive to agitate for their preferred social and political goals and to place more demands on their government to find solutions. That's a very interesting statement. This is an interesting statement to me because it basically is saying that because we now have an easier time being able to issue our complaints, voice our opinions, it makes us care about more issues because it is easier to try and voice all of these issues. Because in the past, if you wanted to be heard on one issue, you had to organize for it. And so you more often didn't use it on every cause under the sun. You used it on like one or two big issues that you really wanted to push for. And so now we, having things like social media, are having a much larger amount of demands because we have an easier time being heard. So I think that's a really interesting trend to be noted of why, frankly, America is even willing to be more bold in its ask on both extremes of what is being requested. It's because they think government can do more because, well, now government can hear them more. And it's an interesting dichotomy to be had. So let's go back into the article. So they say, next, nope, not there. At the same time that populations are increasingly empowered and demanding more, governments are coming under greater pressure from new challenges and more limited resources. This widening gap portends more political volatility, erosion of democracy, and expanding roles for alternative providers of governance. Over time, these dynamics might open the door to more significant shifts in how people govern. In the international system, no single state is likely to be positioned to dominate across all regions or domains, and a broader range of actors will compete to shape the international system and achieve narrower goals. Accelerating shifts in military power, demographics, economic growth, environmental conditions, and technology, as well as hardening divisions over governance models, are likely to further ratchet up competition between China and a Western coalition led by the United States. Rival powers will jockey to shape global norms, rules, and institutions, while regional powers and non-state actors may exert more influence and lead on issues left unattended by the major powers. These highly varied interactions are likely to produce a more conflict-prone and volatile geopolitical environment, undermine global multilateralism, and broaden the mismatch between the transnational challenges and institutional arrangements to tackle them. Next, they have some alternative scenarios for 2040. So, human responses to these core drivers and emerging dynamics will determine how the world evolves during the next 2 decades. Of the many uncertainties about the future, we explored 3 key questions around the conditions within specific regions and countries and the policy choices of populations and leaders that will shape the global environment. From these questions, we've constructed 5 scenarios for alternative worlds in the year 2040. So the questions they have is, how severe are the looming global challenges? How do states and non-state actors engage in the world, including focus and type of engagement? Finally, what do states prioritize for their future? Now, they go on, in a renaissance of democracies, the world is in the midst of a resurgence of open democracies led by the United States and its allies. Rapid technological advancements fostered by public-private partnerships in the United States and other democratic societies are transforming the global economy, raising incomes, and improving the quality of life for millions around the globe. The rising tide of economic growth and technological achievement enables responses to global challenges, eases social divisions, and renews public trust in democratic institutions. In contrast, years of increasing societal controls and monitoring in China and Russia have stifled innovation as leading scientists and entrepreneurs have sought asylum in the United States and Europe. In a world adrift, the international system is directionless, chaotic, and volatile as international rules and institutions are largely ignored by major powers like China, regional players, and non-state actors. Organization for Economic Cooperation in development countries are plagued by slower economic growth, widening social divisions, and political paralysis.
China is taking advantage of the West's troubles to expand its international influence, especially in Asia. But Beijing lacks the will and military might to take on global leadership, leaving many global challenges such as climate change and instability in developing countries largely unaddressed. Yeah, I mean, it is to be said that when you have all these actors acting independently, it's going to weaken bodies that are based on multilateralism and people working together. And when there are major actors who are not in that coalition, it's going to be hard to work collectively when you all feel you have to compete with this one other nation who's not cooperating. And so, yeah, it's going to be an interesting dynamic because, China is certainly trying to lead for China's sake, and they are even doing some of their own efforts, like especially growing its efforts in Africa for some infrastructure development. It's not exactly taking a complete world stage leadership role on certain issues, as they brought up here, like climate change. So yeah, there's been a leadership vacuum that has not been really trying to tackle these issues. Next, in competitive coexistence, the United States and China have prioritized economic growth and restored a robust trading relationship. But this economic interdependence exists alongside competition over political influence, governance model, technological dominance, and strategic advantage. The risk of major war is low, and international cooperation and technological innovation make global problems manageable over the near term for advanced economies. But longer term, climate challenges remain. In separate silos, the world is fragmented into several economic and security blocks of varying size and strength, centered on the United States, China, the European Union, Russia, and a couple of regional powers. These blocks are focused on self-sufficiency, resiliency, and defense. Information flows within separate cyber sovereign enclaves, supply chains are reoriented, and international trade is disrupted. Vulnerable developing countries are caught in the middle, with some on the verge of becoming failed states. Global problems, notably climate change, are spottily addressed, if at all. In tragedy and mobilization, a global coalition led by the EU and China, working with non-governmental organizations and revitalized multilateral institutions, is implementing far-reaching changes designed to address climate change, resource depletion, and poverty following a global food catastrophe caused by climate events and environmental degradation. Richer countries shift to help poorer ones manage the crisis and then transition to low-carbon economies through broad aid programs and transfers of advanced energy technologies, recognizing how rapidly these global challenges spread across the borders. So, yes, what this is basically getting at is the main challenges of our time is three basic things. The three main challenges of our time are: one, climate change. We are facing an environmental problem that is going to cause mass migration trends because of scarcity of resources and uninhabitable environments. We have to start challenging that now. If we want any effort to be able to manage our own countries, we have to help these emerging nations be able to manage their own, and they're being depleted by climate change. So that is one. Two is we are being currently exposed to more and more technological innovation, and this is causing some divisions in our society, as well as the displacement of labor, some of which is causing more risk to be had. Yes, it causes us to have more capability and potentially higher economic growth to be able to address certain challenges, but it also increases risk, and it's making us kind of siloed in general. And then the third is just this lack of trust in institutions and lack of cooperation in general on an international level as well as within nations. And so I think all of these are going to be big issues. We can't work together to start fixing the other problems. We're going to have even more conflict rising, and that leads to even more distrust and more going to our own in-groups to find security in the traveling times. We need to start focusing on getting our basics secured and working together, because I think that is really important. It doesn't have to be like dictating, but kind of come together. But that being said, let's go now to our final story. We are now going to talk about the border crisis. So right now, there's been a major escalation along the border, and there's been a big blame game going back and forth of why that is. So they say Democrats and their allies are pushing back on GOP assertions that President Joe Biden is to blame for the latest wave of children crossing the border, but the latest numbers are muddling their message. The U.S. government picked up nearly 19,000 children traveling alone across the Mexican border in March, authorities said Thursday. That's the largest monthly number ever recorded. Those numbers have triggered hasty visits by lawmakers to the border. The GOP has pounced on the increased numbers, with Republicans holding news conferences to blast Biden's reversal of former President Donald Trump's policies, including prosecuting all parents, taking their children from them, and housing children in giant tents. The response is furthering the partisan divide and slowing efforts to address outstanding immigration issues, such as backlogs in immigration courts and the multitude of immigrants who have been living and working in the country for decades without legal status. The Border Patrol encountered 18,663 unaccompanied children in March, well above previous highs of 11,475 in May 2019 and 10,620 in June 2014. The agency started publishing the numbers in 2009. Before then, adults made up the vast majority of those crossing the border. March's count was roughly double the number of unaccompanied children encountered by the Border Patrol in February and more than 5 times the number in March 2020. A complex mix of factors in the United States and Central America drove the increase in arrivals to the border. For many, a hurricane that hit Central America in November added urgency to endemic poverty and violence that have led people to flee for decades. Changes in U.S. policy under Biden also have guided their decision, whether real or rumored. It has coincided with the Biden administration's decision to use pandemic-related powers to immediately expel most people from the country without giving them an opportunity to seek asylum, which is a damn shame because that's something that they said they weren't going to do. And frankly, this is a very Trumpian policy to use that. And we have used this as an excuse to expel immigrants for decades, and largely bogus, because it's like, what? Are these people suddenly more likely to have disease than our own people? That seems like a crazy notion to me. And we've used this back in the past when, what was it? Like, was it the bubonic plague even? Or was it? It was like some type of a plague. Basically, it was part of the cause of why we even ended up with like the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1876. So this has been a long-standing excuse and largely BS. So it's really disappointing to see Democrats basically do exactly what Trump did. And I think the point that I was making before about how, frankly, my mind is starting to be more open to the concept of open borders is events like this. If you are having your area absolutely devastated by a hurricane, should you have to stay there when you're trying to look for a refugee? Like, I get it. Like, there's technically a difference between refugees and immigrants, but we still are treating them kind of similarly right now, that they can't actually be in America during it. Like, the whole idea of being a refugee is you should be getting access to safe harbor. And then eventually when things stabilize, you go back. But holding someone like outside of the country when they're seeking asylum doesn't make a lot of sense. You're just keeping them in the danger zone. And this often is why, frankly, you're seeing so many, frankly, children that are unaccompanied because, well, they will actually be admitted into the country while these adults are being turned away for these excuses that they're giving us. And so there are interesting reports that have also been seen to be found that, you know, there's been more illegal immigration and more illegal immigrants staying in America because we keep our border closed, because now they can't get back and feel that they can come back to America safely again at another time. So instead, they just stay here illegally to hopefully not have to do another border crossing in the future, because it does suck to try and cross the border because it's been actively made a more dangerous area as a form of deterrent over time. So yeah,
really disappointing the way we handle immigration. And I will say my mind is being more open to it. I'm not saying I'm all the way there yet, but it's definitely been intriguing to think about more. But let's keep going into what they've been explaining here. Children are instead released to sponsors in the U.S., usually parents or close relatives, while being allowed to pursue their cases in a heavily backlogged immigration courts. Yeah, I mean, this is what we're hoping for everyone. That's the thing. It's like if they have sponsors in the U.S., let's have them just be released there, not have them in camps. But yeah, I mean, it's good that children are at least doing that, but it's not perfect right now. There's clearly kids still in these camps awaiting processing, and I think about this kind of similarly to how we have a cash bail system. It's basically, this penalizes poor people a lot of the times, people who are just fleeing in desperate times, and it's basically saying, well, sorry, you couldn't afford it, you didn't have a sponsor here, so we're going to have to keep you imprisoned, even though we don't think you're exactly a flight risk, and we could do things to actually monitor you while you're away instead of just imprisoning you in one spot. Yeah, I think we do it in a very dehumanizing manner. I'm going to keep reading though. Let's go. A next one. At a news conference in McAllen, GOP members of the Judiciary Committee, Rep. Jim Jordan, oh God, that dude's useless, of Ohio, blame Biden for the current situation. Is the Biden administration deliberately imposing this policy because this is what they want? Jordan said, the solution is pretty simple. Go back to the policies that were working. Jeez, what a dumb thing to say. As if like it's not a change in situation of like what is happening. Jim Jordan, I swear to God. Dude has not passed a single bill. Total aside, just useless member of Congress that should be replaced. I digress. Oh, and yeah, one of the only few people who is willing to step up for Matt Gaetz. Like, weird guy. Totally think someone should go target him for an election challenge in Ohio. Even Tim Ryan, who knows? I don't know. Next, the Trump administration put in place a zero-tolerance policy that required the prosecution of all people charged with illegally crossing the border, including parents whose children were taken from them. Court rulings forced the Trump administration to reunite families, but some children still have not been reunited with parents. The newest numbers were released as Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas made a stop on the Texas border at El Paso and in South Texas. Rep. Benny Thompson, a Democrat from Mississippi, who is the House Homeland Security Committee chairman, also was on the border in El Paso. Mayorkas' quick visit to El Paso included listening to advocates who one advocacy group leader said have been starved for engagement now for quite some time. The huge increase in children traveling alone, some as young as 3, and families has severely strained border holding facilities, which aren't allowed to hold people for more than 3 days, but often do. It's left the government scrambling to find space and hire staff to care for children longer term until they can be placed with sponsors. Democratic Rep. Veronica Escobar, whose congressional district encompasses El Paso, said at a news conference Thursday that President Donald Trump did the right thing last September when he followed Centers of Disease Control guidelines and reduced capacity at each shelter as another wave of COVID-19 cases occurred and arrivals of unaccompanied minors were increasing. But, she said, he chose not to follow Health and Human Services advice to find other shelters, limiting their capacity to prepare for rising numbers of arrivals of children, which happened under that administration. The Biden administration had to quickly ramp up, but is running into a hiring slowdown, she said. There are no easy fixes amid growing numbers. Escobar cautioned that fixing the situation in Central America will take a long time. She said Biden is following an administration that had only one Senate-confirmed ambassador in the region and used strong-arm tactics rather than diplomacy. She said Trump's policy of forcing people seeking asylum to wait in Mexico for court hearings gave smugglers the opportunity to become more sophisticated. Yeah, this is exactly what I was just talking about. This is like, it just makes it easier for these people to somehow gain access to the people who were trying to run away and flee because we did not let them come into America. Now, mind you, this means that the cartels potentially could, and that's why I do have some notion of wanting some capacity of security along a border.
But yeah, it makes no sense to keep people in their danger zones waiting for an application of asylum. Next, amid the growing numbers, more than 4,000 people at a U.S. Customs and Border Protection holding facility have been jammed into a space designed for 250 at a tent complex in Donna, Texas. They lay inches apart on mats on the floor with foil blankets. The CBP must transfer unaccompanied children within 72 hours to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, whose facilities are more suited to long-term care while arrangements are made to release them. More than 2,000 children were held longer than that at the Donna facility one day last week, with 39 there at least 15 days. I mean, this is just, I don't know if this is cruelty or incompetence, but it's one or the other, and there needs to be accountability. Like, this is against the law. They are violating the law. HHS opened its first temporary holding facility in Carrizo Springs, Texas on February 22nd, and has since struck a slew of agreements to occupy large venues near the border, including convention centers in Dallas and San Diego, a stadium in San Antonio, and Fort Bliss Army Base in El Paso, Texas. The department also has been paying for flights for children and sponsors to limit time in government custody. Escobar said the Biden administration is shrinking the amount of time children are spending in the HHS shelters, that they go from the CBP holding sites. She said that in 2019, she met children in the HHS shelters for 6 months to 9 months and over a year in a Homestead, Florida shelter. Under Biden, the children have been in facilities for 30 days to 35 days and in an El Paso shelter 28 days, she said. So, I mean, it's improvement. It's clearly like they're working towards it. The shelters are becoming, frankly, slightly better conditioned. But the thing is, which is why the images don't look good, and it's hard for the Democrats to message on this, because of the increase in demand of immigration to the U.S. From either people feeling like there's going to be a more tolerant culture towards immigrants now in America because Trump is now out of office, or it's because of environmental factors like they just said before, or it's escalating crises in Latin America of increasing gang violence or cartel violence. Yeah, any of those could potentially do it, but we need some way to hold these people originally, to process them and have them be tracked properly. And we need to not be holding them forever and infringing on their freedom and holding them in unjust environments. That's kind of how my position is now. As I said, I keep acknowledging this. I'm now a little bit more open to at least talk about the idea of open border policy, but that's kind of what I'm hoping for more, is just quick processing. If that's too hard to be said, and like that's what I think we should be aiming for, so that we are having some sense of what is coming in and out and preventing harm from coming in. Okay, let's keep reading though. Overall, the Border Patrol had 168,195 encounters with migrants on the southern border in March, its busiest month since March 2001, when it counted 170,580 arrests. The numbers aren't entirely comparable because more than half of last month's encounters resulted in expulsions under pandemic-related authority instituted by former President Donald Trump and kept in place by Biden. People who are expelled are far more likely to try again because they face no legal consequences. Yeah, I mean, that is something to be considered as well. It's like, are the amount of apprehensions at the border largely due to people trying again because they didn't face consequences for trying it? And it begs the question, like, should you keep stopping them, or like, should you be harsher? It's why I'm starting to think I don't want to necessarily be inhumane and harsh to people for the simple act of fleeing to seek, asylum or out of a tumultuous situation. So it's like, I don't know. It seems like we should be a little bit more forgiving there and be willing to treat them like civil offenses. And if they want to come here, we should get them on that legal path instead of just constantly sending them back. Okay, next. Mexico's refusal to accept Central American families with children 6 and under because of a new law against detaining migrant families has limited the effectiveness of expulsions, administration officials said. Mexico is especially reluctant to accept families with young children in Tamaulipas state bordering the Rio Grande Valley, the busiest corridor for illegal crossings. That means hundreds of migrant families go to bus stations in Texas border towns like McAllen and Brownsville on their way to their final destinations in the U.S. To save time, the Border Patrol last month began releasing migrant families, about 9,600 people as of Tuesday, according to Rep. Henry Cuellar, without notices to appear in court, instead directing them to report to a U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement office in 60 days. Numbers grew sharply during the Trump's final year in office, but further accelerated under Biden, who quickly ended many of his predecessor's policies, including one that made asylum seekers wait in Mexico for court hearings in the U.S. Mexicans represented the largest proportion of people encountered by the U.S. Border Patrol, and nearly all were single adults. Arrivals of people from Honduras and Guatemala were second and third, respectively, and more than half of the people from those countries were families or children traveling alone. So that is what we had to cover today. It is an ongoing crisis currently going on at the border, and it is, in my opinion, that it is a problem of funding and humanity. It is a problem of funding in that these systems of processing these groups are woefully underfunded, where we cannot process sufficient people, and we are struggling to hire. We need to address that so that we can handle sufficient cases. The second thing is, it does make me wonder how useful these policies really are of border enforcement, if I'm being real. It seems like this is going to be a perpetual problem over time of managing demand of immigration illegally based off of environmental factors in an ever-growingly volatile and inhospitable world, that we have to rethink how we do things. And frankly, you do have to wonder, it's like, well, if these policies were reciprocated at least, wouldn't this allow people to live in areas more often that reflect their values and culture? Like they can just move to a place that they think better reflects how they want to live. I don't know. It's something that I'm going to be considering, and I'll be doing more exploration of over time. But friends, I want to thank you all for joining us today for another weekly recap. I want to encourage you all to go read some of our articles. We have a lot more that happened this week than what I just covered today. We did our basic brief for you all to go check out. You can find it by clicking in the Linktree link and going to our website. That's still thehillofroses.com. We're going to be transitioning fully to the People's Basics sometime this summer, because we want to really build out a nice website that we can have as our long-term framework. And we're still using our old WordPress. But thank you, everyone, for tuning in today to be able to listen to these topics. Comment down below what you think about, frankly. I want to hear your thoughts on open border policy. So leave us a comment if you've made it all the way through. Tell us what you think about open borders as a concept. That being said, everyone, we hope you have a great day out there. And as always, we hope you stay basic.